Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and I want to welcome you all to my channel Plants and Paints, where today we're going to be talking about the Syngonium Red Heart, which is this plant here. I'm sure you'll agree it's quite a beautiful plant. For those of you who have tuned in today, generally you're here to learn a little bit about the care and maintenance of this plant. Now before we actually get into that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a general introduction into the plant itself. So let's get started on that. So the Syngonium is a genus of flowering plants in the family Araceae. It can be found growing natively in the rainforests of southern Mexico, West Indies and Central and South America. They are actually a woody vine which can be found growing to heights of up to 20 meters or more, and can be found growing up trees in an attempt to get as high as possible. So when you actually find these in the shops, they don't actually give you the impression that they're a vining plant and generally just look like your everyday pot plant, but they will, once they get mature enough, they will actually start vining off and produce these huge vines, which can be quite a shock to some people. I actually have one of my followers who recently sent me a picture of her red Syngonium, which had actually started to produce quite a long vine. And to be honest, that was the first time that I'd actually come across one of these that had actually produced a vine as well. In all of the pictures that I see online, generally they're just restricted to being a pot plant, but they do get to quite humongous proportions. So the Syngonium recently has become quite a popular house plant, and it comes in several color varieties and can generally be purchased in its juvenile form, which is pretty much like what you see here. Sorry. Although when I actually bought this plant myself, it came in a 5 centimeter pot and the biggest leaf was probably about this big. So it's as you can imagine, it's done significantly well over the growing season this year, and is still producing lots of new growth towards the bottom there, and it still seems to be growing quite well, although we're pretty much approaching November now. So as the plant matures, what will actually happen, it will start producing a vine. Now with that in mind, what you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to give it something for the vine to climb up so that it can take on its normal growth pattern, or alternatively what you can actually do is you can put it in a hanging basket or a hanging pot and have it hanging from like your window area so that it cascades over the sides, which will look equally nice, and I'm sure it wouldn't hinder the growth as much as some other plants would if they're vining and they want to travel in an upwards direction. Although when this vines, the spaces in the internodes can be quite significant, and the leaves generally are quite spaced out between each other. Now with that in mind, you don't actually have to leave the vines on the plant. If you've bought this as a pot plant and you've not prepared yourself for the fact that it is producing a vine and you just wanted to actually keep it as a pot plant, you can actually remove the vine and it won't necessarily affect the plant too much. It will still grow quite happily, it just won't have that vining feature to it. Although myself, I can't wait for this to actually start producing a vine so that I can attach it to a moss pole and see how much I can actually get out of it, because in nature they do grow to quite huge proportions. So I'm actually going to wrap mine around the vine as tightly as possible rather than just have it go straight up the vine. So yeah, that's a general introduction into the plant itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to lighting. So the Syngonium, as you can imagine, due to its natural habitat being the rainforest, it does well in low to medium lighting conditions. So in general, I would suggest that this is a fairly easy plant to keep for all levels of houseplant keepers. So if you're a beginner, this is fine for you. If you're more experienced, then this is equally fine for you, and a very low maintenance plant to have. Now with that in mind, for optimum growth, what you actually want to do is you want to provide it bright indirect light. So if you want to it to fill up its pot as quickly as possible, then you're going to actually want to give it some bright indirect light. So like I keep generally most of my plants in a north facing window and very bright but indirect light, and they generally tend to do well here, although this particular plant didn't spend most of the growing season there. I actually bought this plant around Valentine's Day, I think it was. I bought it for my partner, and it spent most of the time on our computer table, which is towards the back of the living room, and due to the fact that it can tolerate low lighting conditions, I thought it would be quite happy there, which it was. So we left it there for most of the growing season. Hi babe, sorry, my family have just got back from the museum, so I'm just going to carry on with this. So it spent most of its growing season there, and I actually moved it over towards the north facing window probably about 3 or 4 months ago now, and since then the growth really took off. So as I mentioned, it can do well in medium to low lighting conditions, but for optimal growth you actually want to keep this in bright indirect sunlight. So that's lighting for you. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the potting mix. Now, the Syngonium likes a fertile potting mix, and due to the fact that in nature they are found growing at the base of trees, they're naturally provided with lots of rich organic matter falling from above, which in effect provides a nutrient-rich but well-draining growing medium. To get some spectacular growth, I would recommend the following potting mix. So I would recommend that you use a quarter cocoa coir, I think I said that correctly, or a quarter orchid bark potting mix, and 1/4 charcoal and perlite mixed together. If you don't have the plant charcoal, then that's not necessarily essential. You can actually just use perlite in the mix. So a quarter cocoa coir or orchid bark potting mix, and a quarter charcoal and perlite or just perlite. And then the other half you want to use a good quality, well draining, fertile potting mix. Just to add to this, what you can actually do is you can add a handful of worm castings if you have them available. What that will do is it will give the potting mix a rich nutrient boost, but do use that quite sparingly. So literally a pot this size, I would suggest like literally just a little handful of it, which will provide enough nutrient in there to last for the growing season. Don't overdo it, because too much nutrient obviously is the same as over fertilizing your plants. So that's your potting mix. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to watering. So when watering your Syngonium, water it well, but water it enough so that the water is running out of the bottom of the pot, but do allow it to drain. So don't leave your plant sitting in the water once you finish watering it. So actually take the pot, maybe put it in the sink and let it drain out for 5 minutes, and then put it into the drip tray, and then go back to it 10 minutes after, check that there's no more water that has drained out of it, and if it has, then actually remove that water as well, because you don't want to leave it sitting in a soggy environment, because this plant doesn't like it, and if you do that, it will actually promote root rot. So when watering the plants myself, I use filtered water with all my plants. It's just very convenient for me to do so. I find that, you know, the other options that you've got, you can use filtered water, you can use rainwater, you can use bottled deionized water or demineralized water, and then you can add the minerals yourself. But any of the above minus the filtered water, I find that, you know, there's a lot more effort involved in actually going to get that. So rainwater, you're having to collect it. Bottled water, as lazy as it sounds, I'm having to go across to the supermarket, which is literally just across the road from me. But with the filtered water, I'm buying 2 filter cartridges a month, and both of in a packet, and those filter cartridges will last me 2 months. So I'm only having to change the filter cartridge once a month, and then I'm preparing my filtered water every morning before I go to work. And I do go through quite a lot of water due to my humidifier and mist in my plants and so on and so forth. So just for ease of use, I think filtered water works best for me. I'm sure a lot of you will agree it actually works good for you as well. Now, I think that's pretty much the watering there. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to humidity. So due to the Syngonium coming from a rainforest environment, as you can imagine, it likes a high humid environment. So to be able to replicate that environment as much as possible, I tend to use a humidifier, which I mentioned earlier. Now, I understand that all plant keepers might not have a humidifier, but everything that I mentioned from this point on can be used with a humidifier, but a humidifier is not an essential part of keeping plants. I generally find that people are into keeping aeroids, and plants that like high humidity levels generally will have a humidifier as part of keeping their plants anyway. But if you don't have one, it's not a situation to panic about. All of the above will work for you as well. So the other thing that you can do, and all of these can be used whilst using a humidifier as well, but as I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to have a humidifier. So firstly, you can mist your plants on a regular basis. As I've mentioned before in my previous videos, I mist my plants twice a day. So I'll mist them early in the morning, and then I'll mist them in the late afternoon when I return home from work. Other things you can do is you can get yourself a tray. You can fill that tray up with pebbles, and then you can half fill that tray of pebbles with water, and then you can put all your pots on top of that tray of pebbles. And what that will actually do is that water will evaporate and raise the humidity around the plants. The other thing that you can do is you can group all of your plants together, and that will raise the humidity in a natural way for you, replicating the sort of environment they get in the rainforest, because it's creating its own ecosystem, if you like, where it's raising its humidity in a more natural way. So I think I've pretty much covered the humidity there as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about fertilizing your Syngonium. So when fertilizing your Syngonium, I recommend that you do it throughout the growing season, or for as long as you notice that the plant is producing new growth. So as you can imagine, at the moment we're pretty much out of the growing season, but due to the fact that people who keep these type of plants, they're replicating as closely as possible the environment that the plants live in throughout the year, then you'll probably find that these plants will continue to grow outside of the growing season, but will slow down and stop producing towards, the beginning of a proper setting of winter. So as I mentioned earlier, we're actually approaching November, and I can probably see about 10 new leaves still emerging on this plant. So I'd imagine I can probably still add fertilizer to this for the next month at least, which will take me almost up to December. So when fertilizing your plant, I would recommend that you fertilize at a quarter dilution rate to what the recommended dosage is on the bottle from the manufacturer. So if, for instance, the bottle says to you to fertilize at 10 mil per 1 liter of water, you're going to want to use a dilution rate of 2.5 mil. So just keep that in mind. Now when fertilizing, I would suggest also, because these are quite a delicate plant when it comes to adding fertilizer, I would suggest for you to keep an eye for any burning edges or crispy edges and browning of the leaves and so on and so forth, because that might become an indicator for you that the plant is actually receiving too much fertilizer. Now, if that's not the case, I would recommend that you're using fertilizer every other watering. So water with fertilizer, then water with plain water, then water with fertilizer. But if you notice any browning of the leaves or crispy tips occurring on there, that might be an indication to the fact that you're overwatering the plant. because you're not adding anything else to the medium, it would be the first thing that you should check that you're not doing wrong. And the way to do that is actually reduce the fertilizer. So I would suggest, rather than every other watering, start doing it every third to fourth watering. And if you notice that as it's producing new leaves it doesn't have that issue anymore, then quite happily you can reassure yourself that it was just due to over fertilizing, which is something that you can quite easily remedy, providing you're paying attention and you catch it in time. So I've spoken about the fertilizer there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about temperature. Now it's very basic as far as temperature is concerned. So for successful growth, especially as we're approaching the winter period at the moment, I'll put the winter period's temperature down first. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not keeping the plant at temperatures below 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, which is the optimal growing conditions for it as far as how cold it will be able to take it. And then during the actual growing season, you want to let it get to a maximum of 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is again optimal growing conditions for the plant. Now, I've pretty much covered everything there. So what we're going to do lastly is I'm going to talk about toxicity. Now, for those of you who are regular to my channel, you know that whenever I give a description of a plant and I know that that plant has a level of toxicity, I will give you some general information about that. The reason being, when you buy a plant in a shop, sometimes they won't actually give you information, or if they do, it's very basic, quite simply down to this plant is toxic, keep away from cats or dogs and people, and that's generally all the information you get. But I think that, you know, due to the fact that we're talking about something that's poisonous, I think that there should be more information involved in what they're actually making available to you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the toxicity of this plant, and I literally mean a little bit. I'll probably go on for about a minute or two just to give you a description about that. So the Syngonium is toxic to both humans and pets, and the toxins in the plant are known as calcium oxalate crystals. Now, symptoms of ingestion of this plant will include burning, swelling, and irritation of the mouth, lips, and esophagus, and excessive salivation, plus severe gastric irritation and breathing difficulties, and also it can possibly induce vomiting. So if you've got pets, I'm sure you know, most of you know that I have a cat in my house, but my cat generally doesn't bother with my plants at all. I think my cat just seems to have an instinct to stay away from my plants. I think, you know, that I have a few calatheas which he messes around with, but as far as any of my toxic plants, unless I'm bothering with them, he'll want to know what I'm doing and sort of come over and want to investigate, and I sort of, you know, let him know that no, you can't be around this plant. But once I've put them back in their place, he just ignores them. So I fingers crossed, I hopefully I've got nothing to worry about as far as that is concerned, because I do have quite a few toxic plants in my care. So, you know, if you've got little kids around, or you've got cats, dogs, birds, whatever it is, and you notice that there's something wrong, then, you know, this should be part of your process of elimination to make sure that this is not part of the reason. Because as I mentioned, the symptoms can end up being quite severe, which, you know, can result in breathing difficulties, which can in turn turn life-threatening. So, you know, do keep that in mind when you're keeping any toxic type of plants, especially if you have young children in the house or very inquisitive pets that like to get themselves into everything. You know, if you notice something wrong, just keep in mind that you should be looking over that plant to make sure that you're able to take that out of the equation. Or if there is a problem and you do notice that the plant has been tampered with, then you're able to give some sufficient information to the emergency services when they're actually coming to help you deal with that situation. So What I'm going to do, I'm going to pretty much end there, but before I stop, I'm going to say thank you to everyone from my Instagram account for voting for this video today. Generally, what I do, I put a vote up on my Instagram every week where I let people choose from a choice of 3 plants. In this week's vote, I put in 4 options where one of them was a surprise. It might not be the surprise that you were expecting because it is just a Syngonium. They're quite common within the plant hobby. But I thought that because whenever I've posted it, I've got quite a lot of comments about it. So I thought, you know what, I'll just do a video on this. Because it is quite a pretty plant. It has got a nice pinky purpley hue to it. So thank you to everyone for voting for this video this week. I hope you've enjoyed my video. I look forward to making more content for you to enjoy. My name's Zahir, this is Plants and Paints, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, bye bye.